Sonja asked me not to introduce her. So I say Sonja does not need an introduction. So Sonja, the floor is yours.
So China, there are also the others on my site. Is it right?
Well, no, you need to start your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, of course.
Go to your PowerPoint. Yeah.
So, but there are still some people on my right side. Is it right?
No, you need to choose the speaker view. So on the in the upper right corner, choose the speaker view. But it's okay, I think. We see your PowerPoint, that's fine.
That's fine, okay. Yeah. So let's start. I ask, because I think most of you know me, and who doesn't know me can go into the internet. There is so much written about me that I don't tell you, okay, of course, I tell you that I'm 81 years old, was born in Shanghai, I will tell you, show you, and so on. And I'm a teacher by profession. Okay, I think that's all. And of course, I published also some articles, books, and so on. You see a picture. I hope you can see it now. You can see everything. I was nearly 8 years old when this picture was taken at our arrival in Berlin from Shanghai by American ships to Naples. By an American ship to Naples, and then by simply wagon to Germany. Germany, the homeland of my parents and ancestors for hundreds of years, was divided into 4 zones and Berlin into 4 sectors after the Second World War. My brother Peter was 2.5, and he was very photographed a lot because he was the youngest refugee child arriving in Berlin. So he was afraid to take off his sun hat. I myself spoke German and English, but no Chinese. My father spoke Chinese and even the Shanghai dialect. None of our family lived or stayed in Germany anymore, so no one came to pick us up after we arrived in Berlin on August 21st, 1947. That time we didn't know much about the fate our family members went through. I'm not a historian. As I told you, I'm a teacher. But I know that the division of Europe did not begin with the end of the Second World War, but rather when Hitler seized power on January 30th, 1933, and when German troops marched into Poland at the beginning of World War II in September 1939. The Chinese city was the only metropolis in the world at that time to keep the doors open for many Jewish refugees. And I should add also for those family members who have been Catholic or Protestant. Although the city was in a political critical situation because of the Japanese-Chinese War. My parents at their engagement photo. My own story doesn't begin with my birth almost 80 years ago in Shanghai. My parents conceived me in February 1939, on their first wedding anniversary, in a moment of carelessness and happiness. My mother told me later on. This day was special because they had just gotten all their papers to leave Germany. Although we lost nearly everyone we left behind, my parents, I myself, and my brother Peter lived and suffered together in Shanghai. And when we returned to Germany as a family of 4 in 1947, we were the lucky ones. I'm privileged to be alive, to remember all those who did not survive the horrors of the Holocaust. And sometimes I think I may stand in for all those people who were able to flee and find refuge in Shanghai, in other parts of China, in America, South America, Canada, Australia, Turkey, Africa, or elsewhere. When my mother said goodbye to her parents in March 1939, she felt she would never see them again. She knew she was pregnant, and my grandmother told her to wear a loose coat. So my brave mother did that. And on the border between Germany and Italy, only all the Jews were asked to leave the train for a control. Like now I speak it in German, Juden raus. My mother, short as I am, went to the women's side. Suddenly, she heard a loud voice, Kinder raus, children out. So she ran back towards the train as it was pulling away from the platform. At the last minute, my father managed to drag her back onto the train through the open window. She had narrowly missed her last chance to escape Nazi Germany. In Germany, a country where I can trace my ancestors' lives back to the early 18th century, the Jews used only their given first names combined with those of their fathers. On March 31st, 1808, however, Germany mandated a decree known as Article 15 that henceforth and within a period of 3 months, all Jewish first names were to be accompanied by a secondary, a permanent last name. And some 125 years later, and without a decree, Jews were persecuted and stripped of those names in the camps to become numbers only. My father, for his entire life, could never forget the number he was given in the concentration camp in Dachau in November 1938. The number was 30176. I do not know the numbers, nor the graves, nor even the locations where so many of my wider family members spent their last minutes on this earth. So it has always been my wish to give their names back to them. I try to memorialize my family names and not only theirs. Have you got also such a very handsome father like me? My father was released from the Dachau concentration camp because of my mother's promise to the Gestapo in Frankfurt am Main that they would leave the country, The only paper necessary for this promise was the postcard of my father sent from the concentration camp. Then my mother could get also blank forms from the Chinese consulate in Amsterdam that a cousin had sent to her by airmail. For me, it's always so sad to report that this cousin who saved us could not save himself, nor his own wife and son. They perished in Auschwitz, and also my mother's parents, who gave the money for my parents' journey, died under terrible circumstances in Theresienstadt. When my father came out of the concentration camp, and I would like to say he had to stay there only 4 weeks. But it was enough for him. And so he could go to a travel agency and ask a man, I will say a man, you say sometimes it's very good to know some man or some woman, some not friends, but some people. And that one in the was a classmate of him. And my father was very good at school. And so he's helped him at school. And so this man said, okay, I will help you now too. And if someone gives his contract back to me, I will give it to you. And this is the original ticket for the ship ticket for my parents. They went with the ship Bianca Mano from Genoa to Shanghai. Not only a ticket was necessary, also passports, but Jewish people had no passports. They had to apply first for a Kennkarte, identity card. And they might have gotten that identity card or not. And then they had to apply, if they want to leave the country, they had to apply for a passport. And you see that J in it. The requirement that German Jews, even the Austrians, were mandated to add either Sarah or Israel to their given names was the result of the law of August 1938, amended to include the decree's guiding principles. When my parents arrived Shanghai, and I jump now to Shanghai, you see, most of you know that picture of the Bund, and they thought, oh, what a fine area. It's so nice. It looks so nice. Today, you won't see ships in that area, but they were brought to another place, the international settlement, and there to Hongkew. And what you see here with yellow color was the later on proclaimed designated area from 1943 on up to 1945. But my parents lived there all the time, and I know my girlfriends, Bayer, Monika and Gitta Bayer too, they lived there very nearby. So the place they came to was very much destroyed. It was dirty and overcrowded, and Jewish refugees started to rebuild some of the buildings, and they made houses, and later on it was really nice, I believe. But the area was poor and not so nice as they thought when they arrived Shanghai. and they have seen a lot of beggars and children. Children were always curious, and I think we too, we were always curious, but we watched each other. I had no amma, and there was no boy who cooked for us or cleaned the rooms. So we had something of communication by hands with the Chinese children. My mother was always hungry, like most of the adults, but she told me that shortly before my birth, she was offered an extra portion of a jam sandwich from the kitchen of the Shanghai welfare home where they stayed first. That was a special treat. And I was born end of October 1939. So as a German, I was born as a German, you see. But you see also, I hope you can read it, baby Krips. At the end of October, my father went to the German consulate general to register my birth. There he was told that the name Sonja did not appear on the prescribed list. One of the German decrees of August 1938 said also that kids were mandated to attach recognizable Jewish names to those given them by their parents. Fortunately, my father did not change his mind. Therefore, I was not officially registered with my name. But 3 months later, you see, maybe, I hope you see that you can read it, Sonja. The Shanghai Municipal Council, and there the Public Health Department, and a man we don't know, his name was Lent, maybe he was British, he stamped my birth certificate with that stamp and did write Sonja in it. I will tell you later on what the name Sonja means for and meant for me. And my dad subsequently told me that, quote, if you ever encounter difficulties, you can always return to Shanghai insofar that is where you are registered. I tell you, I tried to find out. There is no registration of the birth or death of the refugees. But I believed in that, what my father said. I was a brave daughter, but I believed in that safety net for a very long time until some years later. My brother was born in 1945. I carefully examined my brother Peter's birth certificate, Shanghai, March 1945, printed in English in dark blue script. It contained neither an official stamp nor a registration number. Rather, my father had used the observe site to scribble the name Peter, the date March 22nd, 1945. My brother was born on the 20th, yes. And I was thinking, that made me thinking. We were in the middle of the war. We lived in the occasionally bombed Hongkew Ghetto. So who, in fact, was available to register the newborns? Our father would have had to line up outside the Japanese Leijiao police station for hours, waiting for an exit permit to leave the designated area without even knowing whether the required stamped document would have been given to him. My brother as a former German. June 1940. I don't know exactly, but I think my parents were very happy, and they went to a photograph shop and have taken that picture. On that day, because I could see the date, on that day, he got a very nice certificate from the Committee for the Assistance of European Jewish Refugees in Shanghai. And it said that my father was engaged there for 3 months. He was very good and had very good results, and he was working there as a German and English correspondent, as a stenographer and a typist. That picture from here, you see, was taken later on because my father lost his job, and together with an Austrian chemist, he wanted to create a bread, because my mother told me that I was a poor eater. For me, it was not interesting. But she told me that the bread they got in Shanghai was so terrible. And so it was an idea to produce and to bring out a bread for the refugees. It was like a toast bread. And you see my picture was on the package, and they called it sunny bread. But the room was not big enough, not high enough, so the job was gone again. But you see, there is an article at Shanghai Jewish Chronicle, also from that time, a bit later. It was April 1941. That's me. Now you have the only possibility to see me as a naked one. That's me. I was the youngest child that time. Then I was the youngest child, 1 year and 4 months. And you know, we were not the only, we didn't belong to the only Jewish community. There were 2 other Jewish communities before us in Shanghai, the Sephardic Jewish community and the Russian Jewish community. And in the Sephardic Jewish community, there were very many, they were rich, and Mr. Sassoon spent the money for a kindergarten. And my mother got a job, a very small job. She could work for a lady tailor, some simple work. And so they got they could bring me to the kindergarten because both the parents were working. It's like today. I like this picture very much. You know why? This is, for example, I got that picture from Yvonne Adler. She was one of our classmates. And her mother designed, she was a lady tailor in Berlin, well-known lady tailor, and she designed and saw the dress for that bride. The dress was made from curtain. And you see all the Chinese children around, and they were looking in front. You see, the wedding did take in restaurants mostly. My friends Illo and Ernst Heppner, Illo from Berlin as Ilse Koratkowski, and Ernst from Breslau, Ernst Heppner, and they married in Shanghai. And also Illo wore a wedding dress made from curtains her mother brought to Shanghai. But I have done the other way around. I will show you. Can you see it?
Yes.
I liked drawing when I was a child, and I designed my own wedding dress. But I didn't. I was born in Shanghai, and as a tourist, I married my boyfriend and fiancé Peter. His name was also Peter. He's no more alive, but we married in 1961 in Moscow. So born in Moscow, born in Shanghai, married in Moscow with a Chinese dress. A lady tailor has done it for me. Most of the younger refugees didn't recognize that the law applied was the Chinese civil code, not as strange to refugee lawyers as might be expected, even though we were occupied and controlled by the Japanese. There was a Jewish arbitration board, a sort of people's court, which adjudicated the vast majority of the refugees' disputes. If a couple divorced, it didn't matter what or who was the reason for the divorce. The children mostly had to stay with the father. Some children never learned why, and of course, they have been unhappy. I was lucky in that my parents loved each other, and even in very extreme situations, they stood side by side. So I myself, and most of the younger generation, especially the kids, felt that they grew up in a totally normal surrounding because we were used to it and didn't know any other way of life. I cannot tell you the exact number of kids who lived in the designated area in this 2.5 square kilometers. But there have been kindergartens and schools, activities during our spare time, like playing or sport activities, for example. For example, some of the boys knows that. The boys mostly played with memoir or like that. I don't know how to pronounce it. And we, for example, the younger girls, they like playing with the rubber. What is it? Rubber. We jumped over that.
Yeah, rope.
Monika, du weißt das. Wie heißt das?
Rubber band. Rubber
band.
rope. Rubber
Okay.
band.
Yeah.
Jump ropes.
Jump.
rope.
Okay. And what I did, for example, I liked dolls. I I designed dresses for dolls, paper dolls, Papierpuppen, paper dolls. My mother told me fairy tales. She got a book of German fairy tales from someone, and I asked her what a forest is, because there was not much greenery in our surrounding in Hongkew. So she answered, try to think about a tree and then the next one and the next one, that's a forest. And I couldn't imagine, for example, what snow means. Once, all the time we lived in Shanghai, there was a snowfall. My father was at home at this time, took the small basin we used to wash our hands and caught the few snowflakes, asked me to put my hands in it, and so the story of Snow White became true. After 30 minutes, it was gone. And so there were very many, for example, I did read something, one of our former Shanghai lenders sent me a copy. You see, the taller boys and girls, they have been at the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and they were at our sporting grounds in our school. They could make something. For example, they played football, and there was a box training, and so on and so on. I cannot tell you everything what was going on, because time is running. Not too much, but a little bit. I don't have the letter, only the envelope from our friend Alfred Zacharias. His wife was non-Jewish, and she gave him the money to come out of the concentration camp, and then he could go to Shanghai, but he was always very sad. And you see, her letters went via Siberia and were opened. And this is the last letter the parents of my mother could send. This is by the Red Cross, sent by the Red Cross. You could write. And 3 months later, you got the answer. I think you cannot read that very well, but there's written in 3 languages, not over 25 words, family news of strictly personal characters. So you could write only 25 words, and then you have to think it over. What can I write? We lived in the designated area, and therefore we needed again some passports or some identity cards. Our friend Alfred Zacharias, I mentioned him already. He went to the Japanese Consulate General and got that one. This is very seldom. There are have been only very few in Shanghai from Shanghai lenders. Our friend Günther Nobel, he had this red bottom, a badget, yes. And if you use the badget on your jacket or on your shirt, and if you had this red badget, you could go out of the designated area. There was no barbed fire, Stacheldraht.
Barbed wire.
Barbed wire, not fire, barbed wire. And for 1 month, the blue one was for 3 months. But the police had to stamp always the date when it was over, when he had to come back. And he could go only to 2 different sectors in Shanghai. And it was controlled by the Japanese, and it was controlled by the police. And in the police, there were very many Russian policemen. And it was also controlled by Jewish refugees. There was a Pauchia system, which I cannot tell you now everything about this system. So, and you see my mother's identity card with the yellow stripe on it. And that's mine. You can read everything, I believe. I think my father wanted to give me my name back, and that I can use everything. I'm very proud of that one. But it's not the only one. Some Shanghai lenders, they have got different children's certificates. We didn't need the certificate, I believe, when we went to school, because the school was outside the designated area, but not very far from the control. But you know, the name Sonja, I thought always it's not typical. It's not a typical name, it's a Russian name, but my parents were sporty, and there was a lady from Norway. She was very good in winter sport, and her name was Sonja Henny. And so they said, if we get a girl, her name should be Sonja. And you know, names, I was always interested in names. And because I was born in Shanghai, and the English way to say is also Sonja, but the Germans, they say Sonja. And I got always trouble when people called me Sonja, like Sonne. In German, the S is soft, Sonja. Then I said always, the Sonja, that's me. Statistically, we know that there were more men than women who came to Shanghai as European refugees, and some of them had to carry more than a heavy burden. They suffered homesickness, missed and worried about their parents, siblings, relatives, partners, or friends whom they left behind. Some of them missed also their children, whom they could rescue by sending them on the Kindertransports to Great Britain or to the Scandinavian countries. Some of them were never able to reunite with their families again after the war. Sorry? This picture I have taken in 1998 when I came to Shanghai first. I will show you that picture once again from another side. But here you see skyscrapers in Shanghai. And on the opposite side, there was the cigarette fabric. And now this house is gone. It's demolished, of course. And the cigarette firm made a nice building over that street. And we lived there behind that balcony, but we had, of course, no air condition. If you see that, this is an air condition. The summers were hot and the winters were cold, but air condition was not in our time. And the roof was was repaired and was different. Okay. As I told you, there were more men than women because the men were more discriminated, and they had very many refugees who came to Shanghai have been also in concentration camps before. So in Shanghai, there were 6 welfare homes, and people lived there in a very crowded. The rooms were overcrowded and so on. My father always said, because they had no money to go to restaurants or to concerts or to cinemas, he said, okay, go to the street. There you have culture enough. You know what it is? A dentist. He's a good dentist because there are so many teeth already over the head of that one. And I don't think the patient got vaccination. I don't think so. You know what it is? Very many Chinese, most of the Chinese in that area.
Future teller?
Yeah.
Yeah, fortune teller.
Exact. And he wrote and read the letters because there were very many people were alphabets. They didn't know how to read and to write. Poor people. And there were still this long dresses. We have seen it. This is a bookshop. Today, you cannot see the sampans on the Bund, but it was in our time. So now you see I was very sporty. And this is a picture when we entered the school. We got the picture and the book. So, I'm sorry. Faith, do you recognize your husband? Hope so. This is Yvonne Adler and this is Judy from Canada. That was taken in 45 when we could go out and go to the Jesfield Park. Now, this is Monika and this is Brigitte. Moni and Gitta. And you know, my brother always told me, because he could hold the bag, the camera bag, he became a photographer. Here he was still shy in that age. 16 and 18. Some children who lived in the Chinese section of Shanghai had no birth certificates, but like me, had to spend their lives patiently explaining why they had been born in Shanghai, so far away from their parents' native country, but probably they have had also similar experiences like my brother Peter. When he was 16 years old, he once entered a one-way street from the wrong side on his motorcycle. Being stopped by the German police, he had to produce his driver's license. After having checked it, the police officer decided not to ticket Peter with the comment, "Oh, you were born in Shanghai, China, so you cannot be familiar with German traffic rules." Nice. So this picture I told you, I wanted to show you from the other side, but here it's quite different. It was the former washing road and the ward road, and this road is going to the museum. This is nearly at the north end of the so-called ghetto, later on ghetto of the designated area. So in 1998, was the first time I had the chance to visit my native town, Shanghai, for the Chinese documentary Sanctuary Shanghai and Escape to Shanghai, made by a Chinese, Chen Jifei, an artist. But up to now, I have been there 9 times. Our old house doesn't exist anymore, but I'm still working together with the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum, which opened their doors end of last year with a new exhibition in bigger space. And I have good contact to ex-Shanghailanders, as we call ourselves around the world, to historians, journalists, universities, institutions, etc. pp. On the year 2000, I would like to say it once again, in the year 2000, the existence of a possible interesting list of Shanghailanders came to my attention, prompting the idea of publishing it on a CD-ROM together with our book Exil Shanghai. While working on this project, I got nearly all the details of this list, and then after holding these survived thin and brittle 473 sheets of paper, I became very excited, as you can imagine. I was looking at the personal data of exactly 14,784 people, foreigners from 35 different countries, who lived near or among us in 1944. Wow. And now you know why I know a lot of names, because I searched in that list very often up to now. It was really very emotional, and giving those Shanghailanders, all of them stateless, a name that makes sense. I started working, made corrections on that list, which became a big database now. Now I've got 19,074 personal data. So that's nearly the figure we speak about, 18 to 19,000. Why it's such a big figure? I could tell you maybe later on too, but stateless have been also all the Russians in our area. And so we cannot ask them, there have been Jews and there have been non-Jews, and there have been refugees and there have been non-refugees. And so we decided to say refugees, non-refugees. For example, there are some people from Denmark or Sweden, or some from Turkey. They were not refugees, we can say. But after so many years, we cannot ask them, have you been a refugee? Where did you come from? What have you done in Shanghai? And so on and so on. So September 2014, 70 years after this list was typed by 3 young girls, 14, 15, and 16 years old, I was one of the about 18,000 European refugees, that must be a better and clear number, who unveiled a wall of names at the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum together with diplomats and Chinese authorities. I can tell you that most of the mostly Jewish European refugees who could flee in great desperation from countries under Nazi occupation, like Germany, Austria, Poland, parts of the former Soviet Union, Italy, and others, who could reach Shanghai, were registered with their full names after their arrival. The first European refugees who came from 1933 to 1937 already were mostly physicians, architects, artists. They could still bring their belongings and stayed in the former French concession. The later ones, like my parents, were mostly poor, but sometimes not as poor as their Chinese neighbors in the Hongkew district, where they found shelter. Speaking of all those lists of the mostly Jewish European foreigners I collected over the years, names and stories became more and more familiar, and I started to correct the names which have been already at the wall of names from 2014 on. This was again a very intensive project, as you can imagine. And I haven't finished all this yet, but end of last year, a new wall of names was unveiled at the Jewish Refugee Museum in Shanghai, knowing that all the names are names of stateless people who could make it to Shanghai, were born or died there, visited the kindergarten, the schools, fell in love, suffered or married, etc. pp. Are survivors. It was taken in 1998, but every time I go to that place, Chinese people are coming around and you can talk with them very friendly. This is the old wall of names, I will call it old wall of names, unveiled in 2014. And these houses were taken off. The museum could get 2 more grounds and could expand. My brother and I, we have been in Shanghai at the museum, of course, and at the German Consulate General, and I got an order, you see. It is, I have to look at Order of Merit of the Federal Republic. I never used it up to now because of Corona. I cannot go to some places where I could wear anything of this. So now you see the square, the backside of the museum, and on both sides here is the new wall of names, and there's much more, space now, more space. And now it looked much better, because if you have, some of you have seen the wall of names before, and it was not so clear, you could not see the names. And of course I corrected a lot. I could not correct everything, but most of it. And today you haven't seen me standing as I mostly do as a teacher. So here you see me. We had an invitation from the 2 German schools in Shanghai. And so we had really very nice discussions with them. So that's, I would like to give it up to you, Gina, and then we will see what kind of questions coming up.